Hello and welcome to another Blu-ray review, and this is a big one for me. This is a special video. I feel like I'm battling hay fever and a heat wave, and the self-doubt of can I pull off this video in a way that I'll be satisfied with it personally afterwards. And I think the answer is no, because I care too much about this one for some reason. I don't know why, but I've really fallen in love with these movies that I'm going to be talking about in this video, which is my overall review of the Eureka entertainment release, Hopping Mad, the Mr. Vampire sequels. This is a release I was cautiously optimistic and interested in, and I've come away a huge fan of the series. Still haven't seen the first one. Still am looking for the first one with the slipcover if anyone has got any kind of leads or hints or anything else of that nature. And I've just come away loving these films. Now, I've already reviewed all four of the films presented in this set, which are Mr. Vampire 2, also known as, in its original Cantonese translation, as Vampire Family, Mr. Vampire 3, aka Mr. Supernatural, Mr. Vampire Saga 4, aka Uncle Vampire, and then finally Vampire vs. Vampire, also known as One Eyebrowed Taoist Priest. So, I've talked about the films. There's a few things I want to kind of go back on, not go back on, but go back to, and some things that I forgot to mention about some of the films. And then we're going to get into all the extras and just my overall review of the entire package and everything else that goes along with it. So, I'm hoping this will turn out well, but if it's any indication of how much I'm personally invested in this being at least a decent video, I have 5, just to peel the curtain back just a little bit in this one, I have 5 handwritten notes here that are just about the extras. So I have a lot to say, and who knows how and where and when and why I'm going to actually say them and articulate them, but I'm excited to talk about these films and the background, which I didn't really know when I first watched them, and it was an interesting experiment, but at the same time, I kind of, it's tricky because it's a 4-film set, right? And I kind of just watched each film blind, and then afterwards I went through all the commentaries and extras, and so it's a bit of an information overload, but it was still a fascinating journey through some of the wheres and the whys and the hows of the Mr. Vampire sequels. So let's get into it proper, and first kick off with just some little bits I would have liked to have mentioned that but either forgot to or didn't really think of it until I was editing the reviews for the films initially. So for Mr. Vampire 2, I just wanted to reiterate, if I hadn't made it more clear, that the makeup in that film is excellent, and especially towards the end with the finale when the vampires are being caught and everything and dealt with by Ching-Ying, that just there's some really cool, like, practical horror makeup going on there that I thought was, like, really top notch and just effective in terms of just, these days we look at horror movies, it's all CGI and stuff and augmented or completely rendered with digital effects. And it's great just to see some good old fashioned practical horror effects. I think the Mr. Vampire 2, even though I talked a lot about the comedy of the film, it's quite effective in those horror bits as well. But also with the comedy, there was one bit that I really thought was hilarious, and I didn't mention in my initial review, and that's when the archaeologists, they take the body of the young boy vampire, and they're transporting him, and he wakes up in the back of the van, and they don't know that he's there, and he's kind of like peeking over the shoulder and stuff, and they just don't notice him. I thought it was really fun stuff. So that was another kind of little mini highlight for me that I forgot to mention. Moving ahead to Mr. Vampire 4, Saga 4, Uncle Vampire, whatever you want to call it. Just one thing that I forgot to mention that I thought was just a really interesting shot. It's a scene in which Wu Ma's character, the Buddhist, he's going to sleep. And so he sets out his bed, which is just the floor and a blanket and an uncomfortable looking pillow. And he lies down, and the camera pans over to this candle. And then the candle burns down, and suddenly we move the day cycle. And I just thought it was such a cool little in camera, lighting effect, obviously with the set, but to show the passage of time, but also how they made the candle burn down really quickly in real time in camera. Like it was such a cool little effect. It's kind of a nondescript kind of, just thrown in there. It was just a nice little flourish, I thought. So that was really cool. Now, vampire versus vampire. I feel like I gave that film a bad rap. I didn't give it a good review because I didn't think it was a very good film overall. But having gone through all the footage to get clips for my review, I'm like, oh, that's really good. Oh, that's great. Like, that was a great little action beat. And, oh, man, that looks really good. And I just thought, oh, that's quite funny, actually. I'm just thinking, it's a film full of really good stuff. I still don't think it puts them all together in a great way, but I do think that I was a bit harsh in it, maybe. And perhaps with repeat viewings, it might actually grow on me a little bit more than I was anticipating from my initial watch. But the kid vampire in that film, I think his physical humor and I guess his comedic timing through just physical humor and obviously no dialogue, I thought was really strong. Like he's a fun little, again, like Dennis the Menace kind of Bart Simpson type character. And I thought that he was really good, and I enjoyed his scenes a lot. I also really like the chemistry between Lam Ching-Ying and Maria Cordero, who plays the leader of the nuns. Like there's just a fun like friction between them, and just I almost would have loved to have seen the whole movie of these two going off on an adventure and kind of the clashes. And yeah, there was kind of a fun little relationship between those two, and it really worked on screen, I thought. And then also one last thing. There's a bit in the film where Lam Ching-Ying, and he comes across in all movies to me as a real badass, even though he's got that ridiculous monobrow. And that's the true sign of a real badass. I think I said in one of the reviews that he has this ridiculous unibrow, and he still comes off as like just, he's just the king. He's just awesome. Like he's so, I don't know, self-assured and confident. He projects a real great charisma on screen. But there's a bit in Vampire versus Vampire where he's just like, he burns his finger on this candle. Like, and he just does it like that, It's the trick, William Potter, is not minding that it hurts. Like, it makes you think of, obviously, Lawrence of Arabia, but, like, just the way he so casually does it. And you can see that he's burning his finger, like it's, I mean, it is badass, but, like, it's, well, I guess it goes to that old saying, pain is temporary, film is forever. And I guess Lam Ching-Ying subscribed to that frame of mind when making movies. And yeah, so that was just an interesting part that I forgot to mention about Vampire versus Vampire. Now, let's just, because I'm reviewing this set, I now know that the genre that these films fall under is the Guernsey genre. Hopefully I pronounced that at least somewhat correct, which means hopping vampire or Chinese vampire. And the origin of that is touched on in one of the commentaries, in one of the featurettes on the Blu-rays. And I'll just talk about that now, I guess, while we're at the beginning here. It's a really funny, dark kind of origin for this, the mythology of the Guernsey, which is, again, these vampires that hop with their arms out straight. So a very long time ago, there used to be kind of a business where a certain, I don't know whether there were many of these places that would do this, but they would preserve bodies. And it was a service that they offered to people, and only to very wealthy people, which is why hopping vampires, they tend to be dressed in this kind of, I think it's Qing dynasty, kind of official, like robes and the hat and everything. Like that look to me is very, it's the hopping vampire look. Now I know that it's kind of a government official attire from that time period. And which, there's a bit in one of the featurettes where someone's saying, are all vampires wealthy? Why are they always dressed in these government official robes? But it's because this preservation of these bodies would normally take place with people who had a bit of money. And when there was a lot of disease and things like that, then a lot of bodies were being transported back to, their home and everything. And so the mode of transportation for these corpses was literally to line them up on like bamboo, with their arms out like this, and they would look like they were hopping. And obviously they would, be a bit sensitive to, people who might see this, going down a country road, a row of dead bodies. And so they would do it late at night, and then someone sees, they can't quite see the bamboo through a trick of the light, or it's dark in the woods and it looks like there's dead bodies kind of hopping down the country roads. And this is apparently a story that Sammo Hung heard and was kind of freaked out by when he was a kid. and that kind of informed him when he was producing, I believe, the original Mr. Vampire in 1985. And so, but also Sammo brought over like Western traits of vampires, like the blood-sucking side of it. So the Mr. Vampire movies are not like this accurate portrayal of like the pure gung-see kind of genre of story. But then again, it's all based on that very interesting origin at the same time. So I find that interesting. We'll get into that a little bit later on with the featurette about real Taoist priests and their kind of rituals and things like that. But anyway, so that's kind of the genesis of this subgenre that kind of really became popular in the 1980s when Mr. Vampire came out. It was a big hit, and lots of people were making imitations and duplications and knockoffs, and they went right into making official sequels with Mr. Vampire 2, 3, 4, and these were made very quick. But they were also done in ways that really, I don't know if they surprised the audience, but at least they were definitely doing things different. They weren't just repeating the same formula from the original film, from what I've read, because I haven't seen the original film. But apparently, you know, the second movie takes place in modern day, which is a big shift from the first one. The third one has no hopping vampires in it at all, even though it's called Mr. Vampire 3. And then the fourth one does things much differently as well. And the fifth one's different too, with the introduction of a Western vampire. So there's lots of divergent kind of stories being told, and you have a similar rotating rotary ring of actors who all come in to kind of play various different parts in all these films. Ching-Ying, he's always playing a similar unibrowed Taoist priest. That's another thing I should mention. I always see it written down as Taoist priest, and it can be Taoist or Taoist in terms of how it's spelt, but apparently the way to pronounce it is always Taoist. So I've been saying Taoist priest when I should have been saying Taoist priest, I think. I'm really trying here. But the films themselves, before we get to again, I really want to celebrate these movies that I've become such a fan of. So I just want to briefly recap the 4 movies for anyone who might be coming to this video without seeing the previous reviews in the Blu-ray review series. So Mr. Vampire 2, 1986. It's about a family of vampires who are unearthed by these archaeologists in modern-day Hong Kong, and they are brought back to consciousness, and they escape. All hell breaks loose, and Lam Ching-Ying plays a kind of a doctor who also is kind of adept in the ways of Taoism, and so he goes off to kind of take down the vampires and neutralize them, along with his assistant played by Yuen Biao. And we have a young boy vampire and his parents, and they get split up. And so you have the parents who are kind of going after the archaeologist assistants, and then you have the young vampire boy who befriends 2 local kids, which is really endearing. And apparently, as a part of the film, most people don't like. I loved that part of it. I thought it was super fun. The montage with the kid going off on like a Ferris Bueller's Day Off style thing with the kids, I thought was one of the funniest things I've seen in a long time. And it's a super fun film. It has great comedy. It has really great action, really inventive stuff, and just practical effects. Like, I think it's a great film. I absolutely love it. Then the third one, Mr. Supernatural. We follow Richard Ng, who plays kind of a disenfranchised Taoist priest, and he has turned to scamming people, but he's befriended these 2 ghosts. And he has them kind of go into people's houses and pretend to be this threat so that he can come in and save the day. And so he's certainly not of pure heart when it comes to the Taoism. But then he comes across Lam Ching-Ying, who is this, like the Jedi master, Taoist priest. And he's dealing with, along with all of his disciples, a very serious supernatural threat. And so Richard Ng with his 2 ghostly friends get mixed up in all of that stuff, and it's just a bonkers film. There's like great horror, great comedy, and I think what I love about these films is that they really celebrate the genre of horror comedy, which is something I really enjoy, because for me with horror, I don't really get scared by horror movies. I can appreciate them. If there's a lot of tension, maybe something like Alien, then I feel the tension, but not the fear so much. But I think when you do a really good horror movie with great effects and everything, but you have comedy infused into it, there's just something about that combination that really clicks and really works. Stuff like Shaun of the Dead or American Werewolf in London. The horror comedy genre is really, I think, it's fertile ground for just like a unique kind of entertainment. And I think with the Hong Kong films I'm really enjoying now, everything I see in these films that is entertaining is just the imagination and the different kind of the slightly different approach to creativity with a camera or inventiveness with choreography. So there's all these different things going on, and in the horror comedy genre, it really clicks. So I'm really loving these movies, and I'm looking forward to seeing like more of this style as well in the kind of horror comedy genre, hopefully. I mean, I'm really at the mercy of what basically Eureka and companies like 88 Films are releasing, because I feel like now I'm entrenched in this like spoiled ground where I'm getting to see all these really great films in like nice 2K restorations, and I don't think I'll be like delving into like ropey DVD copies of these films anytime soon. So anyway, bit of a tangent there, but this video is going to be full of tangents. Where was I? Mr. Vampire 3. Yeah, and I just love all the horror elements with the comedy, and Richard Ung's just so funny. And Lam Ching-Ying plays it so straight that it's just a great kind of combination with those two. And the whole cast is great in the film too. Pauline Wong, phenomenal villain. I really enjoy her in that film. And then the fourth one, Mr. Vampire Saga 4, we have this Taoist priest played by Anthony Chan, and a Buddhist monk played by Wu Ma, who are very close neighbors in this country area, and some hopping vampires kind of ruin their day, basically. So that's a very, very brief kind of synopsis of the film. But, the first half of the film really is just about this feud between these two guys who are from different disciplines, different walks of life. They live right next to each other. Their houses are practically touching noses. And it's just about them trying to get one over on each other until these vampires turn up and just make a whole mess out of everything. And I absolutely love this film. I love the setting. I love the action. I love the horror elements, again, infused with the comedy. But I just love the performers in it. And it's my favorite, I think, just slightly above the second one. So for me, I would rank them 4, 2, then 3, and then Vampire versus Vampire. So the fifth one, which is kind of an unofficial fifth Mr. Vampire movie, was later marketed as such, I suppose. This one is, unlike the first three, which are directed by Ricky Lau, this one is directed by Lam Ching-Ying himself, the Taoist master himself. And you definitely tell, and I feel like it's not on the same level as the other three. But I do, again, like I said, I do think I gave it an unfair... Well, maybe not. I think I did give it a fair review, because that's how I felt when I first watched it. But going back through the footage, I really saw a lot more than I gave it credit for, I think. And this one is about Lam Ching-Ying, Taoist priest, and he has this young hopping vampire boy who's kind of like his assistant / adopted son. And he has his own assistants too. There's always bumbling assistants in these movies. And really, it's actually more about just this Western vampire who's more of a Dracula type, who it takes a long time for this character to become the antagonist in the movie. But once he does, things really kick into high gear, and you get to see Lam Ching-Ying using the kind of Taoist methods, which aren't really working on this Western vampire, which is kind of interesting. Something I didn't really pick up on when I first watched the film, I have to say. And so he has to kind of, really dig down deep to find a way to beat this vampire. But, there's lots going on. I feel like it's kind of episodic, and it doesn't quite fit together, incredibly well. But, I seem to be in the minority of that. It seems to be from the commentary on the Blu-ray and the booklet. It seems to be a fairly well-liked film. But yeah, it's, I think I need to see it again. I loved a lot of things within it, but I didn't love the whole of it, if that makes sense. So anyway, those are the 4 movies. Again, I would rank them 4, then 2, then 3, then 5, I guess, if we were just numbering them. But and 3 in particular, it's just a bonkers movie, the third one. It's just, yeah, these are all super fun. Like, these are films I would love to show to my friends to see their reactions to all the craziness. And so that's something I would hope I'll be able to do in the future, time permitting. But that's the films in the set, and I love them. So that's just one thing we'll talk about is the transfers. So The first two, Mr. Vampire 2 and 3, they come from 2K restorations, as per the back of the Blu-ray. And then Mr. Vampire 4 and Vampire vs. Vampire come from HD restorations, which seems to be carefully worded there. Now, 2 and 3 look fantastic. 4 looks great. Like, you're seeing a great healthy grain structure. I'm not the biggest videophile in the world, but I am a stickler for quality if I see it. And I just thought they looked like really good. Like, I love the grain on them, the detail. They feel like really good restorations, and it shows. And it's a joy to see these kinds of films from that era, which, again, maybe aren't the most popular films in the world. Getting this kind of restoration treatment is really exciting and just a blast to watch. I love seeing films just with all that grain and the grittiness and the raw detail. But Vampire vs. Vampire, completely different story. This one looks so much softer in comparison. It doesn't have the same grain structure as the other three. It still looks good. It doesn't look bad. At no point did I really go, oh, this isn't really. Do you know what I mean? And again, I'm not really. It's hard for me to be disappointed with how a film looks on Blu-ray, especially again when you're dealing with these films that aren't like huge studio releases from Warner Brothers or whatever. So it's just great to have these films in high definition up to a point. But I would say that the first three films on the set look notably better in terms of grain than that. And I don't think it's a case of DNR being applied. I just think that it's not as deep of a restoration on the fifth film, which is fine. But I thought that I would mention that because I often just say that the transfer looked good, but in this case, I could point to the fourth film on the set as being one that does look a fair bit below the quality of the other three on the set. Now, extras wise, let's dig into that. Audio commentaries in this are a huge one.
Bong, 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 bong. Wah, 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 wah.
We're talking 5 audio commentaries across all 4 films. So let's just get into my thoughts on some of the commentaries. So for the second one, the first film in the set, Mr. Vampire 2, we have a solo track with Frank Zhang. This is a great one, and I think it's great because this is his favorite of the sequels, and his enjoyment of the movie is really infectious. Even just him enjoying certain bits of the film and kind of remarking on it is enjoyable to me because it was one that I really connected with too. So I liked that he liked it, and that I think really bled over in the commentary itself. He talks a lot about Lam Ching-Ying and how he was typecast as this kind of Taoist priest character later on in his career, how he died young, unfortunately. And he also talks about the writer of the film, whose name I've forgotten already, but also how this writer has a really specific kind of humor that really works well, according to Frank. And I agree. I think the humor is pretty spot on in the second one, and that was probably my favorite aspect of it, actually, especially, again, the montage with the young vampire boy. And speaking of the young vampire boy, so Frank said that in his commentary for one of the third film, he hadn't found out what happened to that young actor who plays the young vampire boy in Vampire Family. He also plays one of the 2 ghosts that Richard Ng is working with in Mr. Vampire 3, and he plays kind of like an important figure as being protected in Mr. Vampire 4. And then he did nothing else. I think there's one other film that he did, and then that was it. And this kid vanished off the face of the planet. But Frank did find out what happened to him, and gets to kind of tell the story in the commentary for Mr. Vampire 2. But I will leave that to that commentary. I don't want to spoil it, but it's an interesting outcome for what happened to this young kid. He also talks about how the actors who played the 2 kids that the vampire boy becomes friends with, they didn't do anything beyond that, and it was kind of common for child actors to make a few movies, and then the parents would not be supportive of them continuing that in case it would impact their studies and so on. So that makes sense, I guess. He also praises the acting of Yuen Bu, who is obviously more well known as a martial artist and kind of doing a lot of the action stuff, which he doesn't do a whole lot of in Mr. Vampire 2. And so Frank kind of praises just like his actual just acting ability in the movie. And then he also talks about how he respects the sequel for doing something completely different and being set in like the modern day at the time that it was made, of course, and not just doing a complete rehash of the original. So yeah, I thought this was a really good commentary. He also mentioned that he worked on the new translated subtitles for Mr. Vampire 2, and there's the sequence in the film where everyone's moving in slow motion and talking in slow motion, and he said that the way he thought was best to picture that in the subtitles was to do dashes in between the words, which is a fair point. I like the minutia of that, just like how you would choose to convey a slower form of speech in subtitle form. So that's the kind of nerdy shit I really like. Great commentary. For Mr. Vampire 3, we have Mike Leader and Anna Venema, and this was another great one. Really lively, really entertaining one with them bouncing off of each other and stuff. There's a great story that Anna goes into about the origin of the woman in the well story. Like that kind of trope of like a woman who dies down a well and then comes back for vengeance that we see in various movies and kind of media. And he talks about the original Japanese story that was a play, I think. I don't know if it was bunraku or kabuki, may have been both, and puppets and then on stage. And I just loved hearing him tell the story, like the first one of that kind of the woman who gets thrown down the well and killed. And yeah, so that was a really cool part of the story. That, I mean, there's a little bit in Mr. Vampire 3 where a woman, the demon kind of spirit, gets thrown down a well. And so there's a little shades of that in Mr. Vampire 3, I suppose. So it was pretty pertinent to the commentary. But yeah, it was I like that, hearing that a lot. It was kind of a cool bit of history, storytelling history, which I find fascinating always. They also talk about Lam Ching-Ying and kind of profile him a little bit and talk about how he was quite a standoffish person, but also very loyal. And they talk about Pauline Wong and Mike Leader kind of seemed to be on the same track as me when it comes to Pauline Wong, and that even though she's playing this kind of like barbaric kind of quasi-disgusting character, there's still something quite sexy about her. Like there's a sensuality to her, especially in the second phase of her character where her eyes hanging off her face. There's still something quite alluring about her. So when he was saying all that, I was like, yep, I know exactly what you mean. I think I commented on that in my review as well. So that gave me a good chuckle. They also talk about, very sadly, that at the time where they're recording that commentary, Richard Ng was in ill health at the time, and they wish him well, but he did unfortunately pass away earlier this year, so probably not too long after they recorded the commentary, actually. So yeah, very sad to hear that he'd passed away, but I think it's really cool that films being released on these Blu-rays, people like me can kind of come to them fairly blind and be like, okay, who's this Richard Ng character? And I've only seen him in 2 films now, Magnificent Warriors and this, and I love him. I can't wait to see him in more stuff. So, new people are coming to these performances even after their passing, and I think that's an important part of what makes film special is these great performances that get recorded and can then be watched and viewed again and appreciated by future generations. So I think that's a cool thing. But obviously it was a shame to hear that he passed away recently. They talk a little bit more about, again, they mentioned this in the Dead and the Deadly commentary they did about Chinese culture in terms of like what they do after you die and things like that. And that ties into this film, Mr. Vampire 3. So it was similar ground, but there was some other things explored that I found quite interesting. Now there's a second commentary on Mr. Vampire 3, the only film in the set that gets 2 commentaries. This one's by Frank Jiang and John Charles. And I have to say this was a bit of a weak one for me. I don't know what it was. It was maybe it's just coming from like a really lively track, on the same movie, and then switching over to a more drier kind of, some dead air, quite a lot of dead air in this one. And there's a couple of moments where John was asking Frank a question, and I don't know whether Frank I don't know what it's like to record a commentary like this, and maybe the pressure you feel to deliver a really good one, much like maybe the pressure I'm feeling to make this video a really good one, because I'm really passionate about these movies and I want to do a good review of the Blu-ray. But I think that, I don't know, I'm not sure what it was, but it seemed like Frank was thrown whenever John would say, well, what does this mean? Or, what would that be? And Frank would be like, huh? What? Like, I just could tell in the tone of his voice, he just wasn't prepared for it, and it kind of sandbagged the commentary a few times. It is what it is, I guess. It wasn't a bad one by any means, and there was still a lot of interesting information. I really like when Frank gets into the nitty-gritty of like wordplay and how certain jokes, even with really good translated English subtitles, he's still not picking up on some of the nuances. So he does explain quite a few things that are interesting in terms of just the again, the minutiae of some of the wordplay in the film and things like that. And they also compare the film to The Frighteners, which I'd never really considered, with the plot of Richard Ng kind of working with these ghosts and kind of scamming people. So yeah, it was all right. It was just compared to the other one, it kind of the contrast wasn't too great, I suppose. It was much more of a low key kind of track with some dead air and stuff. But I feel bad kind of critiquing anything like that, because I think it's such important work that they're doing with these commentaries, and it's such a great resource for people who are interested in the behind the scenes stuff. So it is what it is, but it was certainly had some good stuff in there, which I really enjoyed. For Mr. Vampire 4, Saga 4, that title just doesn't sit right with me. Mr. Vampire Saga 4, like, where's that saga coming from? Get rid of it. Anyway, this one is Mike Leader and Anna Venema, and lots of filmography talk in this one. Like the first half of the film, they barely really talk about what's happening on screen. It's all about the filmographies of all the people involved in the movie and stuff, which is interesting. But then at a point, sometimes it's it's a lot of stuff I've not heard of. But then, yeah, and then I think, I could note down some of these films, but there's so many. You just have a list that goes on forever. But still some interesting stuff. And they also talk about, or at least Mike Leader talks about Loletta Lee. And, he's talking about some of the films that she did and like the Category 3 films that she did. She got a bit naughty, as they say. And then Mike just goes off on this, like, he's talking about, like, and then she did some photo books, and he's, like, talking about, like, specific, like, nude photo shoots that she did. And I was just, like, listening to, like, what the fuck? It just cracked me up. I love that it was, we're reviewing, like, the nudie books now. So that just really tickled me for some reason. They talk about Yuen Wah, whose character in the film is very effeminate and I think very obviously gay. And, they don't seem to really dive into that too much. They just say that his character probably wouldn't fly now in the way that he's presented and portrayed. And Mike also very amusingly suspects that the boy who plays, the vampire in 2 and the ghost in 3, and then he's in the 4th film, he suspects that this actor really was a vampire and they just killed him off on set because he never did anything else after these 3-4 movies that were all based around kind of magical, supernatural stuff. Well, obviously we know what happened to the guy if we listen to the commentary for Mr. Vampire 2. And Anna even says he tried to track down that actor and he wasn't able to. So 1 point to Frank in terms of finding out what happened to a child actor who never continued performing beyond his initial run of films in the 1980s. Very specific category there, but 1 point to Frank. And finally, it made me feel like an idiot. I don't know why, because the actor who plays Wu Ma's assistant in Mr. Vampire 4, his name, to me, as read, is Chin Garlock. But it's Chin Garlock. So the Ka becomes Ga, at least in the way they're pronouncing it, if that's right. See, I always kind of like, I'll hear someone pronouncing something and I'll go, that's the way to say it. And then I'll say it and I'll go, wait, did I get that right? Do you know what I mean? Like, I get too many salty comments from people saying, like, I got a comment recently on, I'll just say it the way I used to say it, I guess, the Werner Herzog film, Agia, Wrath of God. And someone commented a couple of days ago going, you pronounced Agia wrong already, that's a big no-no. And I'm just like, what? Like, well, tell me then. Educate me, inform me, instead of being a dick, I always get hung up on pronunciations. I always want to be correct. But yeah, Chin Garlock. So I'll try and remember that if I see him in a future film. But I really enjoyed the commentary on that one because I really love the film as well. So, and there were some amusing parts as well, as I just mentioned. And then finally for Vampire vs. Vampire, we have another Frank Jen commentary. This is a really good one because for me, it also made me appreciate the film more as well. And so my experience with Vampire vs. Vampire is watching it and going like, yeah, it's nowhere near as good as the other 3 really, and it's just not a very good film. And then like the commentary, making the review, I'm like, oh man, I'm just getting battered by like regret that it's actually a really good film that I need to reevaluate. But yeah, it's a really good commentary from Frank, and he enjoyed the film a lot more than I did, so I think that comes through as well. And the film's title is One Eyebrowed Taoist Priest. So it's the vampire versus vampire thing doesn't really get delivered on. That's probably because that's not the original title, and they just marketed it as that, which is a cooler sounding, like, ooh, vampire versus vampire. False advertising, I would say. He doesn't go into why Lam Ching-Ying directed the film, and even in the booklet, it just seems like there's no real mention of why Lam Ching-Ying took over, or at least decided to direct the film in the Mr. Vampire kind of canon, even though it's kind of seen as not canon, but it's in the same vein and stuff, and I would like to have heard why he decided to do that. But he only had directed one other film apart from Vampire versus Vampire, which was an adaptation of The Green Hornet, which was a spectacular bomb, which probably is why he didn't make another film after that. And so he has this very short 2-film filmography as a director, and obviously is much more lauded and remembered and respected for his acting credentials and filmography. Filming on Vampire vs. Vampire took a year, which stunned me, because I know that they probably make these films in a couple of months, but a year. And it's apparently because he wanted everything to be perfect, and because it took a long time to build the sets. And again, I just felt like, it doesn't feel like a film that's been toiled over for a year and kind of, cooked to perfection, And so again, it makes me feel like even more of a dick for not enjoying the film as much, considering how much time was put into and effort was put into making it as good as it could possibly be. Apparently the chemistry between Lam Ching-Ying and the young vampire boy was so good on the film and on screen because they're actually related, apparently. And also some of the rituals that he does are kind of pretty much invented by him. They're not really tied to any actual Taoist rituals or anything, but because there's lots of different things that he does in the film. And again, I see those when I'm editing the review. That's really cool. Just a little scene where he pulls the thing out of his hat with these 2 fingers, and then he pushes them into the, like just little sleights of hand that he's so good at doing on screen. And I don't know. Maybe it's a secret masterpiece that I need to open my eyes to more. I don't know. Anyway, those were the commentaries. Great stuff. A wealth of information and really enjoyable. Now, there's 2 new featurettes on this release that were produced for it exclusively. The first is called Taoist Cinema, The World of Mr. Vampire, and this is interviewing a real-life Taoist priest, and he talks about the various methods, the weapons, the rituals, and he talks about how Lam Ching-Ying really nailed, performing as a Taoist priest. He got the demeanor down right, and kind of the eyes were very important. And he talks, there's a phrase he had, it was something to the effect of, he had the death gaze that ghosts feared, which all Taoist priests need, this was a super fun piece, but it made me think of is he working? Which in wrestling terms, like, is he like, because like he's talking about all this stuff about what you do with ghosts and how ghosts kind of will sometimes get stuck in a body and so on and so forth. And he's talking about this as if it's real. And I'm thinking, like, okay, is this like an actual thing where he believes in it, or is he like protecting the Taoist kind of ways, or is he simply just working it and playing kayfabe, where it's just like, you just you work the audience. Either way, it's fun. Either way, I found it interesting. Either way, all the little bits and pieces that he had to say was for me quite fascinating in the realm of the genre of stories that we're looking at, but also the Taoism, which I find really interesting. It's I wish I had all the time in the world to just look into everything ever, but I kind of lament that, because the whole Taoist thing is so cool to me in the movies. It might be completely different in real life, and I'd love to look into it more, but I don't have the time. It's just like, I sometimes get interested in things in movies, and I think, I'd love to know more about that, but it's just, there's only so many hours in the day, unfortunately. But this is a really good little featurette, which was directed, edited, shot, and scored by Arne Venema. So bloody good job. Like, it's a lot of things to juggle. And it was a really well put together piece. Like, the editing of it was really nice and slick, and some of the just splitting 2 images on the screen, it was just really snappily put together. It was a really great piece. And then also, and that's on the first disc. Also on the first disc, we have extended scenes from Mr. Vampire 2. This is really interesting. So the first one is just an extended piece of the 2 assistants to the archaeologist just bickering between like who's going to stay with the bodies while they go off to deliver the young vampire body to show off what they found. Then the other extended piece is Billy Lau fighting with the adult hopping vampires. and it's just a little action piece that was cut from the final film. But I went back and looked at the actual film itself, and there's a big continuity error. So basically, he's putting his hands on the male vampire's chest, and then all of a sudden, in the next shot, he's being thrown off the table, and the female vampire behind him was like completely horizontal, and then suddenly she's stood and frozen with the talisman over her face. So there's a complete continuity error in the film, which I didn't notice whatsoever. So they just cut out a portion of the film and just thought, well, fuck continuity, no one will notice. And hey, I didn't. So that was just a fascinating part of the editorial process that I found was there's things that fascinate me by looking at actual cuts in films where there were extended scenes before. There's another scene with the two young kids who befriend the vampire boy, and it's just kind of it's quite a lengthy scene with their father at the dinner table. I can see why they cut it, but it was kind of cute. I enjoyed watching it, so I'm glad that I don't know, I guess these were just available and Eureka put them on there, and I'm really glad that they did. It's just a nice little bonus that I wasn't really expecting for films like this, I suppose, that they feel like movies that were made very quickly to, because I think Mr. Vampire 2 came out like 8 or 9 months after the first film, so they very quickly turned it around. They make them, they release them, and then, I wouldn't feel like they'd have the foresight to hold on to deleted scenes and stuff, so it's cool to see them. And then there is an alternate montage, like my favorite scene of the film, the vampire boy going on the big day out. There's an extended version of that. And one thing I really enjoyed was that in that sequence in the film, there's a couple of times where the young kid is corpsing, like he's smirking. I don't know whether that's like intentional and meant to make us laugh even more that the vampire boy is smiling. To me, I just think the young actor is just like cracking up. And then also you have the double kind of meaning there of this young vampire corpsing. But but the extended montage, I liked seeing it, but it wasn't as good as the one in the original, in the finished film, I should say. So they made the right choice in paring that down. Everything about it, from the timing and then just the selection of shots, was much better in the finished film. So I'm really glad they included it, but I do think that they made the right call in just trimming it down a bit and getting to the bare kind of essentials of each gag. So I think that it works better in the finished film. On the second disc of the set, we have the other exclusive featurette, which is Vampire Legacy, also produced by Arne Venema, and I think his production company is called CFK. And so there's a bit in this featurette where there's like a VHS going into a VCR, and the flap goes down and there's a logo, and it's very quick, and I thought, I bet there's an Easter egg on that little logo there. So I went back and it said CFK on the VCR, which is a neat little touch. I saw it, I appreciated it. So Vampire Legacy is about how the Guernsey genre and the hopping vampire, kind of the iconography of that, has kind of seeped through to different parts of Hong Kong culture. So you have these guys who make these hopping vampire toys, collectible toys, which is really interesting. They seem like kind of likable people. They talked about watching movies with their parents when they were younger and stuff. And one of them even talked about how Mr. Vampire 2 was the first like horror movie that made them cry, and talked about the young boy being reunited with his mother and stuff. And that was one of the parts I found kind of slightly touching about the film. So it was nice that they mentioned it. There's a guy who is a fashion designer and has worked kind of movies and media and kind of, some of the hopping vampire stuff into some of the t-shirts and stuff that he produces. And there is a t-shirt that has a design of a Chinese ghost story, which is one of my all-time favorite films. And one of my all-time holy grail pipe dreams is that Eureka will get the rights to release a Chinese ghost story. Even the whole trilogy would be amazing, right? But it's buried in rights hell, from what I understand. But we have officially a Chinese ghost story in some way, shape, or form on a Eureka Blu-ray. I'll take that as a half win. And then also he talks to some of these men who run these effigy stores, the kind of the burnable kind of objects that people have for their funerals. And that was kind of a fascinating little morbid thing, but also like, you see like all the stuff they've got in there, like kind of generic items, but then like custom made, like a PlayStation 5, that would be burned at a funeral, so it would then go off to the afterlife for the person. And then maddeningly, they'll, one of the shopkeepers is saying, we got to keep up with the times and the items and the objects that we offer to our customers. And so during the pandemic, we came up with effigies of like COVID testing kits and masks and hand gel. And I'm just like, that was such a like, my jaw dropped at that. And then finally, there's a little interview with Mike Chan, who appeared in a 2014 film called Sifu versus Vampire. He played the king vampire in that film, and so he talks very briefly about his experiences in playing a hopping vampire and having a fight scene with Yu and Byu. So that was kind of cool. It was just a really nice kind of kaleidoscope of little bits and pieces, and how that subgenre has left an imprint. And I thought it was a really good, again, super slick piece, nicely edited, really well put together, really great stuff. Then we have trailers. We have trailers for all 4 films. Oh yeah, I'm going to review the trailers. We're going all in on this one. I've been waffling on for a very long time, but we're going to bring this one home. So, the trailer for Mr. Vampire 2. And I love it when we get old school original trailers in high definition, and we get that with Mr. Vampire 2. And I like how it was like, the text on screen was like, Mr. Vampire 2, the sequel to Mr. Vampire. It's like, yes, that's what the 2's saying. Yes, we get it. And there was a line in the trailer that I thought was really funny, something to the effect of, Mr. Vampire 2 offers the audience plenty of scares, but also thousands of opportunities to laugh out loud. And I thought, yeah, it kind of sums up the film. Maybe not thousands of opportunities, but it's interesting to see how they market these films. And I think that this is like a 4-minute trailer. Scenes completely out of order to the film, like you'll be jumping from the climax to back to the beginning of the movie, and it spoils things left and right. It was interesting just to see how they were trying to get people into the cinemas, and it showcases a lot of great moments, but it's so completely alien to the way movies are promoted in trailers today, but also just, I think, Western trailers in general. But to have that in HD was really cool. Mr. Vampire 3, also in HD, so that's great. And this was a great like highlight reel. Not much of like, here's what the story is. It's just like, look at all this great shit. And it was just impressive, because Mr. Vampire 3 has some bonkers stuff in it, some great visuals, and that really is highlighted in that trailer. And we're now to my final page of notes with just a few bits and pieces left. So I'm just going to hold it in front of me now. The trailer for Mr. Vampire 4, this is in standard definition and was really rough looking, actually. It's the worst looking thing on the disc, really. But random highlights, pretty choppy, it was what it was. I love the film, but it was, I'd rather just be watching the film at that point. And then the trailer for Vampire vs. Vampire is also in standard definition, but it looks really good. It's like a nice, crisp kind of DVD quality trailer. And it was good. It was a well-done highlight-style trailer, but I think the trailer for Mr. Vampire 3 was the best one, and it was cool to get a couple of them in high definition. To really round this thing off, just the last little bits and pieces here. Mr. Vampire 2 has an English dub, and Vampire vs. Vampire has an alternate home video mix, also in Cantonese. I don't know anything about that or what's different about it, so it is what it is. I've stretched myself to a breaking point in terms of being comprehensive with this review, but we're not even done yet. We're almost done, I promise. The slipcover. I mean, I just love this thing. I think it looks awesome. I love the colors. I love that ridiculous peachwood sword that's coming out there from Anthony Chan. I love that there's bits from all 4 of the movies that are represented. You got Richard Ng on there, Billy Lau, Lam Ching-Ying, obviously Wu Ma, Yun Bu, Moon Lee, Pauline Wong, like just all the all the main characters there, and the hopping vampires. I think are just a really great slipcover. And on the inside, you get reversible sleeve, and you get posters for all 4 of the movies. So we have one for Mr. Vampire 2, which is a pretty cool one and shows the vampires in kind of the modern setting. We have Mr. Vampire 3, which is kind of a caricature style poster there, which is kind of cool. We then have Mr. Vampire Saga 4, which is a pretty bland poster, I have to say. It's some cool caricatures, but it's not much going on with that one. And then finally we have Vampire vs. Vampire with the very prominent 5 there to kind of denote that this is kind of the 5th Mr. Vampire film. And we're still not done, because finally then we of course, I'll leave that in for free, have the booklets. So we have the cast listings and kind of the credits of the people who like made the films. And then we have Bouncing Back, Return of the Hopping Vampires by James Oliver. This is a fairly comprehensive essay, really lengthy, that goes into just the origin of like the Mr. Vampire film coming to be, and how the sequels kind of spun off from that. And we get a lot about each of the 4 films, stuff that isn't even included in the commentaries, and so there's not a whole lot of repeated behind the scenes information. I really enjoyed this. This really kind of just sealed the deal. It was a nice cherry on top. Get some nice images in there, kind of production stills and kind of promo shots from what I can tell. A couple of posters in there as well too. And just a really well-written piece. Really, really enjoyed this. And again, just rounds off for me, I would say probably my favorite release of the year. It's my favorite release of 2023. I said that recently with the Bullet Train, which I guess would be my favorite single movie release. But I mean, this was one where I just was like, okay, 4 movies. It's going to be a lot to review and get through. But yeah, it blew me away. Those first 3 films in this set, fucking phenomenal. And the extras are great. And I think I've talked enough. I'll leave it there. This gets my highest of marks. There's just so many great special features on here. Hours and hours worth of stuff. And, you know, these commentaries are just, I'm really loving them. And, you know, it's a loaded release. What more can I really say? I feel like I'm just spinning wheels at this point. And I don't even know how to end this. It's like I've been talking for so long, my body doesn't know how to stop now. You know, but yeah. It's also very late. Like, I have very limited segment of time in which to film. And again, hay fever, I've had to pause about 20 times, and with the magic of editing, you shouldn't notice too much. Heat wave, absolutely dying under these lights, but, you know, whatever I can do to make a good video about a great, great Blu-ray. This is just, yeah, fantastic stuff. I cannot wait to go back to the original film, and I might even do a review of it just to kind of, you know, fill in that kind of, you know, series of videos in this Blu-ray review series where I've talked a lot about the Mr. Vampire films. I'll leave it there. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.